Hey there, lifter uppers. I'm Deb Creer, the co-host of Cancer and Comedy, where our mission is to heal cancer-impacted people through hope and humor, something we like to call turning the grim into a grin. Thank you so much for joining our conversation today as we talk about reinventing your life and pursuing your dreams beyond the trauma of a cancer diagnosis. This is the episode where you will be inspired to remain or get creative in your life no matter what your circumstances are. So here is the host of Cancer and Comedy, Dr. Brad Miller.
Hey, thank you, Deb. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to spend some time with you and with our cancer and comedy audience. Good folks here. We like to call them lifter-uppers, the folks who are committed to living a life where we turn the grim of cancer into the grin of celebrating life. We are all about here creating a community of people who are supportive of one another, who help people get through things, to help them to cope with hope, whether you're facing cancer or some other really issue that kind of brings you down a little bit. We're all about using hope and humor in order to have healing. So we're here to get people connected to our community, and we hope that you can do just that by going to our website and following our podcast at cancerandcomedy.com/follow. Hey, Deb, I got a couple of dad jokes for you just to get things rolling here. Here's one here. Why did the man return the camouflage jacket gift he was given?
I don't know. Why did he return the camouflage gift?
He just couldn't see himself wearing it.
Boo.
Here's one more for you. I used to have a fear of hurdles, but I got over it. There you go.
Bump.
There you go.
Well, today on Cancer and Comedy, our guest is Dr. George Ellis, a urologist who, among other things, treats cancer. He is also a filmmaker and the author of a cookbook with his son. George is quite the creative guy with many varied interests and dreams that he is pursuing.
Indeed, I had just a wonderful conversation with George, Dr. George Ellis, about his medical career as a urologist, treating people with various ailments in this area, including cancer, prostate cancer, and other cancers of the bladder, and so on, and including some of his take on how to do basically bedside manner, or how to approach things from a storytelling aspect in terms of how he related to patients. We also talked about how he is using his medical career and his medical services in a volunteer manner with underinsured people in particular. And there's some really great parts of our conversation surrounding that. But that's not all. He's not just a doctor treating people with cancer. He is also a filmmaker. And he has his own filmmaking production company, and he does several things in that world. So he's a very creative person that way. He makes horror films, among other things that he does. And he also is a writer and a chef in his own right, working with his son, whose name is Adam, to write a cookbook. And it's all about taking kind of a surgeon's or a doctor's approach to cooking, which is kind of an interesting take. Here's the thing, though, about what I learned about George. He's really all about pursuing your dreams, about kind of giving back to others, and to not letting transitions in life, whether they be health-related or transitions like retirement, kind of be hold you back or be anything that is less than you pursuing great things in your life. And I think he gives us some great lessons here about not being consumed by that kind of, which is kind of right before us, but to still pursue our dreams, no matter if the crisis is cancer or something else. And that's one of the ways I think he gives some lessons on how to cope with cancer and other things, to unleash your creative side. Now, Deb, I've got to know you as a very creative person, but let me ask you about how has your kind of creative side of your life been altered, changed, unleashed, anything perhaps in your life by coping with cancer? Tell us about that.
Well, it's funny. You say I'm creative, and I'm like, no. I'm certainly not artistically creative. I can't draw a straight line with a ruler and paint by numbers even defeat me. But, it is something that I think when we have cancer or something, very serious, we need to start thinking we need to do whatever it is now. So many times we are putting things off. I'm going to volunteer more. I'm going to paint pictures. I'm going to do all those things at some point in the future. Whether it's when we're done with our job, when we retired, maybe it's, we're raising a family. And so we think, okay, well, once the kids are off in college, all of those various things. And I think what is so important is no matter what, for everyone, don't put those dreams off. Do them now because you never know what the future holds. And your dreams are going to bring you joy. So why don't you want more joy now?
That's an awesome way to put it. Why hold back? Why,
Mhm.
sometimes we have felt like, that we had a career or we were raising kids or we had to, deal with things in a marriage or something else. Or, we kind of wait to retire or wait to something else. Well, why wait? Let's get after it right now. And sometimes cancer or something else becomes an impetus to do some different things in life, like George did. And I know you write on your website and on your Facebook group a lot, and that's awesome. There, what do you think? What are some of the things that you kind of learned a little bit about George that may be helpful? You think to our audience as we get ready to dive into this interview here?
Right. Well, he did talk about giving back, and we've talked about that. He talked about the importance of making sure that you are informed, whether you're the patient, the family, the whoever. Make sure you know what the heck is going on.
Right.
And then, of course, I love this strategy. Is you have to build your tribe of people around you. We should not go through any of this alone. And who can we bring in to help us? And some of it is, who is our medical team? Who might be our spiritual people who are going to contribute? Who are the people who are just going to make us laugh when we are feeling absolutely, totally miserable? All of those things. It's so important to build your tribe.
Well, it's going to be great to hear from him. His name, again, is Dr. George Ellis, urologist, filmmaker, author. The book he created with his son is a surgical approach to culinary arts. His son is actually a chef, butcher, specialized in meats and so on. So there's some interesting stuff we're going to talk about there as well. And so I look forward to it.
Right. I can't wait to read his book.
Our guest today on Cancer and Comedy is Dr. George F. Ellis, and he is an American physician and urologic surgeon. He's also a writer and a filmmaker. He's performed thousands of urologic procedures, been published in many journals and scientific literature, and he also worked with the underinsured as a volunteer. And right now, he's involved with making movies and appears in various film festivals and is the author of the upcoming book, A Surgical Approach to Culinary Arts, along with his son, who is a butcher, Adam Ellis. So welcome to our podcast conversation today, Dr. George Ellis. Great. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. George, you got a bit of an interesting and fascinating, a little bit of an eclectic story here about your life. But one of the things I really like to learn from our guest here in Cancer and Comedy is what is something in your life that's just kind of lit you up recently or put a smile on your face or just made you feel kind of good about other people, about situations in life, something good in your life, something that's happened to you recently.
Well, something that's happened to me recently would be in the past year. This has to do more with filmmaking
Yes.
because
Okay.
I have another story about the medical side and working with the uninsured. So about a year ago, I was in the mountains with my son in Colorado. He lives in Denver, and we were hiking. We were about 7,000 feet, and I said, "What would I want to do if I want to do something big than just travel and go to the beach, in my retirement?" And I said, I've always been involved somehow in making movies, either for public health messages that we've done or some promotional videos we've done for the hospital. My first experience was as an extra in a couple of movies when I was in medical school. So I said, I'm going to start making movies and I started this company, Coronado Beach Productions, and I hired a cinematographer, and she also does the editing. But the first thing I did was I went to the Florida Film Festival, and I was in a room of directors, and there was about 60 people in the room. And one of the things I noticed was that a lot of people had ideas and things they wanted to do in film. They just didn't have the funding. And I said, you know what I can do? I can start doing this kind of work and then eventually help others fund their wishes and dreams in the film world. And I think that would make a lot of people happy because those budding filmmakers will have an opportunity to actually make their film. And then, of course, the people who see the movies, they'll potentially get some enjoyment out of these movies. So that's what's happened. And I've now funded my own movies, but I'm now involved with two different projects. One that's ongoing now called The 12 Mile, which is more of a horror movie. And you can go to the12mile.com to see that. And then I'm also involved with an upcoming movie called Hollywood Sign. And if you know that Hollywood Sign in California, it turns 100 years old this year.
Okay.
So it's a story that involves that sign, and we'll be filming right there in Hollywood. We had to get special permission to go up on the mountain and film right at the sign. And both those projects I'm a producer in both of them. And that basically means that I'm funding some of the projects.
Yeah, sound like that's been a labor of love and labor of joy for you, and a bit of a twist and turn over your background and career as a urologist. It seems like to me. So what kind of led to this story? About how did you end up? You mentioned a little bit about doing some filming as a urologist, but kind of tell me a little bit about the story about how you ended up going, into urology and dealing with, kind of severe things that people deal with, to the film world and eventually becoming an author. Tell me a little bit of that, how that journey navigated for you.
So when I was in medical school, and then mostly as a resident in training in Syracuse, we always are prompted to do research and publish our work, which is what I did, and then always with the background of film and wanting to do film and being involved with the media, that was always of interest to me. So I wrote some book chapters with some other doctors and attorneys. That was several years ago. And I had not written a lot of things. I was writing some articles for the local medical society. And then things kind of changed. I was very busy with my practice. I was doing a lot of trauma and emergency room work. And so that gives you very little time to dedicate to other things.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was heading towards retirement a few years ago, I was thinking, well, maybe I should do something creative, painting or I do a lot of yard work and sort
Right.
of do some landscaping. And so, like I said, a year ago, I started thinking about films, and I said, well, this is where I'm going now. I'm going to do this. And so here we are.
Well, kind of interesting, and that obviously I can just tell by looking at you on video here. You got a big smile on your face, and you seem like a guy who, when you made the turn at retirement, you leaned into you came out of pretty intense work as an MD, as a doctor of urology, and dealing with where we talk about medical procedures and cancer, and I'm sure you dealt with prostate cancer and other things like that in your career. Some pretty serious stuff, to something you really enjoy, and it still is a benefit to others. And you also have this part of your life where you still volunteer your medical skills to be helpful to people who are underserved or underinsured and things like that. So we're going to come back to the filmmaking and the authorship, but tell us a little bit about this part of your life where you still keep your hand in your medical practice through serving underinsured people.
So I started doing volunteer work probably 24 years ago, and I was helping the county with a situation that occurred where some of the local emergency rooms were shutting down. And so the few emergency rooms that were left were getting flooded with a lot of patients. And some of them were patients who were uninsured, who had no primary care. So they were coming to the emergency room with, sniffles and sprains, things that did not need to be in an emergency room. So I helped the county create clinics around Orange County, which is where Orlando's located, so that we could have a primary care access for those patients who didn't have any insurance. And a lot of these facilities were either free or sort of on a sliding scale of how much money they'd have to pay based on their income. And so I always said to myself, while you're volunteering, you could always, even when you retire, continue to do the volunteer work, because that continues to help people. And one, people are so grateful. And two, there's no insurance work, there's no paperwork, there's no approvals, referrals, all those
Okay.
things that in a regular practice have become standard
Right.
in medical practice.
And I'm sure those standard practices have their challenges as well, both from the MD part of it and the practice and from the patient part of it. And then you are able to basically give something back that kind of cuts through a lot of that stuff and gets to the real heart of the matter, which is healing, right? It's being a part of a healing process.
That's exactly right. And, a lot of patients that I see, they have a variety of different conditions like urinary tract infections, kidney stones, prostate issues. And under normal circumstances, it's hard for them just to see a regular doctor
Sure.
because of the socioeconomic conditions, much less see a specialist like myself.
Hmm.
And at the time, 20 some odd years ago, I was able to recruit some of my colleagues to join the volunteer effort in helping some of these folks who, had difficult in accessing care.
Mm.
And so our big network of agencies is called Primary Care Access Network, which is PCAN. And you can find it online at pcanorangecounty.com, and you can see all the different services that are available and how we serve those folks. And I got to tell you, everybody tells me that those patients that they treat or that I treat, they're so happy with the opportunity to be able to have treatment. And we give them surveys to fill out, very brief surveys. And, everybody gets very good grades in that realm, in that, they're happy they can see some kind of a doctor.
Well, isn't that great? And if you could make it personal just for a moment, tell us a personal story, if you will, about a person that you encountered in this treatment process who may have come into the process, kind of beat up by the world. And a lot of these folks have had difficulties in all kinds of ways, not just medical, right? They have all kinds of challenges in life. But I'd like to hear a story, if you will, about somebody that you were able to see or treat or be a part of their life, and kind of the before and after, whatever problem they had, whatever the urological issue they had, and you're able to treat it medically, but how they may have come out the other side a little better place. Do you have a story like that?
Yeah, I do. I saw a patient a couple of weeks ago, and she had a condition where she had a lot of irritation in her bladder, and she also had some blood in her bladder that kept coming up on her urine tests. So we did a full investigation with CT scans and ultrasound. And then I did something called a cystoscopy, which is where we look inside the bladder with the scope. And I didn't find anything of any severity, no stones, no issues like that. But what I did find is that she had this chronic, sort of small amount of blood in her urine with no known cause. And some people have that. It's called benign hematuria, which is a small amount of blood. And I was able to treat her with some medication that she had never been on. And when I saw her last time, which was probably the third or fourth time I saw her, she was so happy that finally she was relieved of these symptoms of, sort of the same symptoms you have when you have a urinary infection, that irritation, that frequency, like you always have to go. And
Right.
finally she got relief from that. And so that was a good thing for her.
That is awesome. And I love to hear stories like that because really what we're all about here on our podcast is about life transformation from kind of the grim things that happen to us. We like to call it going from the grim to the grin, and you have this vibe about you, George, of not only wanting to see transformation kind of medically, but you saw her emotional countenance change as well, and everything's integrated, and that's such a good thing. And so I appreciate that. Can you maybe along this line, for instance, we kind of are in a sense, George, kind of two sides of a similar issue. I'm a prostate cancer uh, patient. In fact, I got an appointment with my urologist in a couple weeks here, and I had prostate surgery for prostate cancer surgery just about a little less than a year ago, and so that's part of my life. But that all happened to me right after I retired, and so that kind of led me to doing kind of my life as a pastor before that, was pretty involved with that, and now I'm involved with this. This is my entertainment thing that I do try to give back. You come from the perspective of the doctor who's still volunteering, like in your medical field, but you're also getting into the film work and so on, and which is all about entertaining people and transformation in one form or another. An author, we'll talk about that in a minute. What I'd like to talk to you about is the kind of where those worlds cross paths for a minute, where they intersect, and so. And we already talked about this patient that you mentioned here about how everything about her changed. What do you think is the relationship in your experience about things such as a good attitude or good humor or mental health issues in terms of its relationship to medical issues and also its relationship towards having good outcomes? Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that one of the things you just mentioned was the intersection between those processes, and I think the intersection right there is called service to others,
Mm-hmm.
and where we want to serve other people. We have a calling to do that. Obviously, you've had that, and you've done that most of your life. And of course, as doctors, we do the same thing. But one of the things I've noticed in my medical career is that those people who have a good attitude usually fare better in healing, in their approach to their treatment, in compliance to their treatment and taking medication. And in this particular example that I just gave you, I could tell that this patient was going to do okay because after I finished her procedure, she was almost like halfway there. I told her I didn't find anything serious. Everything seemed to be in order, but she was having these symptoms and she wanted some relief. And I could tell with her smile that she was hopeful. She had hope, and that's what she was looking for. So when I prescribed the medication and she came back to see me, and I said, "How's everything?" and she said, "Oh, much better." And there's your answer.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
And I think that comes back the other way too, doesn't it, George? Where it helps you too as the doctor, and to be affirmed in that. And I'm sure there's medical doctors and other folks who some have a good attitude and some don't when they go into things, and sometimes they get bogged down with all the administrative nonsense. And I don't know all the details, but I know that it's there in the medical world, as well as in every other world. But did you see that difference too when you get that feedback from a patient or from anything else that you're involved with, that helps you too in terms of wanting to keep giving back? Does it help?
What it does, it gives you motivation
Okay.
to either continue what you're doing, or if you get to a point where things are a challenge. We have challenging patients sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
We don't quite know what the answer is. Sometimes we need another specialist to kind of, take another look. So all of that makes us feel like we got to get to the goal. And the goal is to give people hope and relieve them of their situation so they can move on with their life, with their work, with their family. And that's the big thing that I get, is that if I could help somebody, I want to do that. I want to figure out every way I can do that.
And if you can offer that hope, it's a good thing because really, whether it's medical challenges or when you deal with underinsured, there's got to be financial challenges, other things like that as well. And you can deal with some pretty, when you deal with bad news, especially medically, it can rock you back your heels. I remember when I met with one of the first meetings I had with my urologist more than a year ago now. He was a super nice guy, and I really like him a lot. But he says, you know, you've got you've got prostate cancer, and that means impotence and incontinence. And it means that if you don't do something about it, your life is going to be cut short, likely. And those are pretty heavy things to deal with because that deals with your self-esteem, it deals with your life, it deals with your marriage, and all kinds of other things. And you're dealing with some heavy, heavy stuff, and you're trying to navigate that as the medical part, but also offer hope. Can you give us some tangible ways that maybe our audience might see hope? And we're going to. And maybe this starts to delve a little bit more into your film work and other things. Might see hope, or might see a light at the in the midst of those dark places. When I'm sure you've been in that place where you've had to give somebody bad news. If you tell somebody they got prostate cancer or something else going on urologically, that's not good news. But could you speak to this a little bit? From your perspective, how you can offer a little hope to people even are dealing with some really dire situations.
Yeah. Recently, I saw a TV show, and there was a medical situation, and the person was given like really bad news, and it was a terminal condition. And the doctor said to the patient after he gave him the speech, he said, "I'm sorry." And I said, I never say I'm sorry to a patient because it's like you already feel defeated.
Right.
Because it doesn't feel good to say, "Oh, here's some bad news, and now I'm sorry about it." So for me, I always want the patient to be informed about everything. So all the treatment options, what is the condition? And for example, in prostate cancer, you probably heard the term active surveillance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
which
Right.
which is one of the
One of
treatment
one of several options. Yes.
Yeah. And so that came from the fact that, we were doing so much surgery, and with the complications you just described, was there another way for certain patients that we could manage them? And so I think I would say that at this point, giving people their information and making sure they're informed, even if it is potentially a terminal condition, they want to know.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know if they have to have all their affairs in order, if all the things that could happen. So I think that the information, and I'm never opposed to people going on the internet to looking at things
Mm-hmm.
and coming back and telling me I found this and this and this, and then I will tell them, well, this information is accurate, and this is sort of not so accurate. So I think the information that they get and the decision that they make thereafter is essential.
Yeah. And I think part of where we're going here with this, George, has to do with relationship between the patient and the doc and other people involved, spouses and other people involved as well as staff. Because, as a pastor, I've been at the bedside of many people in hospitals and other situations for 40 something years. And I've observed this and heard people talk about it and experienced my own family. My own dad had cancer and so on. It makes a big difference what that doc says at that seminal moment. You give the bad news, but if the doc says, "I'm sorry," and walks out the door, that's a big difference than the doc says, "Okay, here's the bad news. Here's here's some options of what we can do about it. And what's next steps, that type of thing." And I think that makes a world of difference. And I'm just wondering, out of your own experience, have you seen that, or is there any training that goes along for MDs regarding how to handle the interpersonal part of things? That what bedside manner they call it, things like that. Is there any observations you might have about that?
I would say today there is more focus on the approach that you have with a patient, and that comes from working in the hospital as a medical student, working in the hospital as a resident in training, and you're always learning from other doctors, especially the ones who have been in practice for a while, as to how you approach it. Now, I'll tell you that 40 years ago, there wasn't as much training because it was more like, you have a patient, they have a condition, you diagnose it, you give them medicine. Or same thing, they have a diagnosis, you do surgery, and that kind of thing. The whole, I don't want to say human part, it was hard. There was a time years ago when if a patient was given a cancer diagnosis, the family was informed and the patient was not.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And I always thought that, why was that? But that was the way it was in those days. They didn't want the patient to be frightened, so they told the family. And then now they're kind of, the family's kind of stuck and telling, well, what do I tell them?
Yeah. That's not fair either, is it? That's not fair, or not.
It was
Not
a different.
wise.
It was a different time.
Yeah, indeed. And well, I've experienced some of that in my life, especially early in my career. Let's begin to see now what you're doing now in order to, we talked about these situations here, and you're doing some great work in volunteerism, but do you see how filmmaking, and now as an author of a book, and I want to talk about your book here in a minute, especially in terms of diet and cancer and things like that. But do you see filmmaking as an expression of offering people hope as well, offering people some entertainment or something to put either a thrill or a smile or a laugh or a transformational moment? Tell me, you mentioned how it was always an interest of yours, but do you see any correlation now between the entertainment world and the healing world? Any correlation there?
Well, filmmaking is telling a story.
Okay.
It's always the same thing. There's some story, and sometimes by telling the story, you put the person in another world that's outside of their world, and they enter somebody else's situation. It could be something very good. It could be something like a horror movie. It could be a love story, and it could be a documentary where they're getting some information. And so for the 5, 10, 30 minutes, 90 minutes of the movie, they're transported into a different world, and they get a different perspective on what they're living, and could sort of sometimes get some parallel with some of the things that they're dealing with, and trying to resolve those things as they move forward.
I think when people say things like, well, they watch a movie and they say something to the effect of, I kind of got lost in it or absorbed in it, it is, as you say, I think you said something to the effect of transported you into that, and that helps. And certainly it can be for someone who deals with, cancer or other things like that, it can be a distraction as well. I know I like to watch, comedic TV shows and movies and things like that, just to make you laugh for a minute, that type of thing. So that sounds like a little bit of what you're working on there with your production company to make some films and some things that I understand. Had some that were kind of technical in nature, and some that are more horrors and other things like that can help people to maybe a bit of a distraction. What do you find right now about filmmaking that's feeding your soul, feeding your itch this way? What's it doing for you?
When you look at a movie, I'll give you a little secret. There's sometimes a trailer
Yeah.
that kind of gives you a preview. The trailer and the beginning of the movie are what we call the hook. That's going to hook you to keep watching the movie. And once you've been hooked, the rest of the story is going to keep you entertained. And so for me, I guess my pleasure is being able to find the hook, whether it's the trailer or the beginning of the movie or both, so that people continue to be interested to watch the rest of it. Now, one of the movies, the first movie I did, which has won several awards, is just a 5-minute independent short movie.
Uh-huh.
And so that doesn't take a lot of time to watch a movie for 5 minutes. But when you get into more longer movies and feature films, you really got to make sure you've got the hook that keeps people interested. And so I find that when I get the feedback from, friends, family, people who are watching my movie online, and there is a positive feedback, that's of course, very rewarding.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And recently, you've been able to do something that I understand is pretty rewarding for you. You're working with your son, and you've written a book. And there's a real interesting kind of a curveball, if you will, in terms of understanding your life and your son's life and how it relates to cooking and other things as well. So I don't want to give away too much here. Tell us the name of the book and how it came about that you and your son came to write this book.
Well, my son is also a certified nursing assistant, and that's like a licensed
And
profession in
tell us your son's name.
Adam.
Okay.
Yeah, Adam George, from me, Adam George, and so he helped me in my office for several years. He was assisting me with some procedures, and I think he kind of saw that as something that he could do with his hands. And so he got a job at a local store that does a lot of beef and a lot of specialty foods. And he started learning how to cut meat. And at a certain point, maybe he was a year into it, he said to me, "I cut meat like a surgeon
Mm.
because I worked with you in the office." And so I said, "Okay, that's good." And then that's when it clicked. I said, "He's cutting meat. I cut, for surgery. There's there are some parallels there, and then there are some differences."
Mm.
So those are the things that we bring out in the book, and we also have some recipes in there. And my mother was French, so I learned a lot of cooking from her. But he learned a lot of cooking from from his job. And one Christmas he bought me a smoker, so I learned how to smoke meat. And he does well as far as grilling food, and obviously he knows all the different cuts and everything. So it's been a constant work in progress. And him and his buddies, they also have a podcast that they have not yet put online. It's called Chewing the Fat.
Okay. Well, and the title of the book is A Surgical Approach to Culinary Arts. Is that right?
Yes.
So this is just to be clear, and I'll confess I've not read the book, but is this an actual cookbook or is it something else? Or is it both and of kind of a life approach thing? Tell a little bit more how this is going to benefit our audience here or other audiences here in terms of.
Well, yeah, as a book with recipes, that'll help people to look at, how many of what ingredients go into a certain recipe. But it also gives us a little bit of a perspective of a journey
Okay.
of how myself as a doctor and my son as a meat cutter uh, sort of lived in parallel worlds that sometimes came together and ultimately came together in this book.
Hmm.
And a lot of the diagrams that are in the book are about anatomy of the cow and the different cuts of meat, like the Delmonico and the strip, and so he made some very nice diagrams that will be included in the book. So I think it's a well-rounded approach. But I have to tell you where the title came from.
Okay, please.
So when I was in residency, one of my colleagues, who was a surgeon also, he he went up to Mount Everest 3 times.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And he gave us a talk once amongst all the surgeons, and it was called A Surgical Approach to Mount Everest.
Okay.
And I never forgot that title. And I said to myself, I put that together and I said, this is great. The surgical approach is what I do, but the culinary arts is what my son Adam does. So
Wow.
that's how all that came together.
And I think there may be some correlation even to some of the health aspects we've been talking about a little bit. Is that I'm not a nutritionist, but I do kind of follow a keto approach to my own diet, keto, and I am a meat eater in that regard. And do you think there is some correlation or some benefit to people in terms of dealing with their health? Would there be some things there that would at least be helpful to people health wise?
Yes, yes, because in most of the recipes that we've written, some of them we've written in a standard way. So, for example, in a French recipe, they're going to use a lot of cream, a lot of butter, a lot of things that may not necessarily be healthy for someone who has cholesterol issues. So, we've written some alternatives to those ingredients that people can use that still make the dish flavorful, but in a healthier manner if they're focused on a healthy approach to making that particular recipe.
Okay. Well, there's some, uh, I've been, as you know, when people have a profound health issue, at least for me, and I think many people, that also becomes a life transition moment, for everything, including your diet, for instance, and exercise and things like you see people who, when they have a heart attack, all of a sudden they become more in tune with, heart health and eating and exercising. Certainly with myself, when I was diagnosed with cancer, that was also a reminder about I'm diabetic and so on, about my own health. And so I changed a lot of my health habits, and basically had huge improvements on my diabetes and some other things like that because I changed my eating patterns and exercise, almost every day and that kind of thing. Some things I didn't do before. So what I'm getting at here is what we're talking about here, George, has to do with the actions people can take to change their life. I'm hearing several things here. I just want to touch on this with you as we kind of bring our whole conversation around. You changed your life when you retired and you decided to go kind of in a little different approach. A lot of docs when they retire go play golf, right? And that's cool.
That's right.
I'm nothing wrong with golf, but you went off into filmmaking and writing a book and so on, and you seem to be very delighted with that. We talked about the transitions you made with some of your patients, especially some of the people who are underinsured and so on, where they, were able to navigate some difficult circumstances and have life transitions there. You talk about your son being involved with his life in terms of kind of coordinate with you. And many people may have said, well, following your dad's, footsteps here and going to become a doctor, he had some training in that, but it led him in a little different path. And you converge back together here in this area here. And I think there's some value in understanding the value in transitions that take place in kind of pursuing a dream, pursuing a new walk of life. Can you say anything approach it? And first of all, am I somewhat accurate in my assessment of our conversation here? And can you speak then to the value of that moving forward?
So I think that first of all, what you said is exactly accurate. That's the summary, as we could put it. But the value is, I have a philosophy that I don't want to end up at a certain point where I have anything that I say, gee, I wish I had done that,
Right.
or I wish I had pursued this. I don't want to get to that. So for me, and as I've gotten a little bit older, I've said to myself, if you, meaning me, if I want to do something, I got to go off and do it. If I want to take a trip, I've got to do it. If I want to try a restaurant, I've got to do it. Because you know as well as I do, we're not here forever, and we want to be able to enjoy what we have. And if we can benefit our fellow man, isn't that what it's all about?
Absolutely. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, let's have one. I want to frame our conversation. I began our conversation with saying something put a kind of smile on your face. And I want to kind of conclude it this way. Is there any experiences that you had in practice or in your life that just kind of struck you funny? We call this the Cancer and Comedy Show, but just struck you funny. I'll give you an example. When, for me, when I was recovering from my cancer surgery, I had a catheter for a couple of weeks, and my dog who was an older dog, got confused and got somehow tangled up in my catheter line, and I ended up following my dog around for a little bit, if you know what I mean. It was a painful but funny as heck scene. I just wonder if you have anything in your life or experiences that just kind of struck you funny.
Well, I'll tell you. I think there's a lot of moments that we have that are funny. I think that some of the things that people do, like you talk about a catheter. Some people do interesting things. They have very finite instructions as to how to handle it, and they come back to have their catheter removed, and you find strange things on the catheter,
Oh my goodness.
or or the catheter, is plugged up, and now their bladder is full, and they're not sure why it's draining around the catheter, which is
Oh,
not supposed to.
yeah.
And then you realize, well, the catheter is plugged, but they never bothered to say anything.
Oh
Um,
my.
and
Yeah.
and so I think that that's kind of interesting. One of the things that was funny is that when I was in the hospital, I had a patient. We have this bladder irrigation system, so it's a catheter, and
Right.
there's fluid that goes in one way and it comes out another way. And I went to visit the patient in the morning, and it had been rigged up in a way that made absolutely no sense. So the outflow was used for the inflow,
Oh my.
and the inflow had nothing on it. So it's not designed to work that way. And fortunately, it was time for that catheter to come out. So
Okay.
it's like, okay, so we won't even deal with this anymore, because, but to me, it's like, obviously it was, somebody in the hospital who was tending to that patient that wasn't quite familiar with the system, which, that's the way it works sometimes.
Sure, sure. Well, just one more thing. What would be your word, of kind of encouragement to someone out there who may be dealing with whatever it is? Some they've met to their urologist and they've had bad news of some sort, cancer or whatever it would be. What would be your closing words for our conversation of encouragement to that person to get them through?
I would say recruit a support group. It may be your family, it may be friends, or both. So recruit people to help you through this, but get informed. Get informed about what is happening, why it's happening. And I have some patients who almost end up knowing as much as I do, because they study it and they really research the whole process.
Well, George, you've been a fascinating guest. Thank you for that great word of encouragement there. We love to hear that. That's what this podcast is really all about, is trying to offer a different light. You talk about your book, A Surgical Approach to Culinary Arts, being kind of different sides of things. Some people say, why do you call your podcast Cancer and Comedy? Well, we want to try to see kind of there's a grim part of life and there's an uplifting part of life. And you certainly have embodied that in our conversation here today. So how can people, if people want to reach out to you and find out more about what you're involved with, either your book or your endeavors in filmmaking, how can people be in contact with you, George?
Well, I think the first thing is, I see on the screen, my name is there on the screen, and I have an Instagram and a Facebook and a YouTube channel. So if you look up my name, or if you look up the name of the company, which is Coronado Beach Productions, if you research that on Google or whatever your search engine is, you can find the information. You can find trailers to my movies, some of the videos that I've done. You can find the latest things that I've done. You can see some of the awards that my films have earned, and you can get educated about what I'm doing, and hopefully you'll follow and subscribe to my channels.
Absolutely. And we'll put connections and links to everything you're about, Dr. George Ellis, at our website, cancerandcomedy.com. His book, which is coming out in March of 2024, is that correct? March of 24?
Yes.
Okay. Is A Surgical Approach to Culinary Arts. Dr. George F. Ellis, and he co-wrote that along with his son, Adam Ellis, MD, our special guest here today on the Cancer and Comedy Podcast with Dr. Brad Miller. Thank you for joining us. Well, just want to thank Dr. George Ellis again for being our guest here today. What a great interview. We'll put links to everything he is all about at cancerandcomedy.com. Deb, did you enjoy our conversation with Dr. George, and what kind of things did you learn?
I did. Well, first of all, I'm going to have to watch his movies. Maybe. I'm not a horror movie fan, so I'm not sure about that. But I'm going to get the book. I think it's going to be fantastic. I loved his perspective from how to deal with a diagnosis of cancer or, whatever, from the physician's perspective. And I really liked it when he said he does not tell the patient, I'm sorry. because he thinks that's kind of a defeatist type of thing. And he is wanting to always offer hope. And so, he wants to do everything he can, no matter what the diagnosis is, to uplift the patient and show them that, things can, we can get through this, no matter what's going to really happen. But I found that very interesting that he does not apologize for the diagnosis.
Yeah, I think it's great too. And also, he just has a very vibrant, alive. I was able to, of course, see him on our Zoom call, and he had a big smile on his face the whole time and a big good energy about him.
Mhm.
And just a
Right.
sense of that this is a guy you kind of want to get to know and to be
Right.
around. And,
Mhm.
we've talked about this before, but the relationship of the doctor and a patient does matter quite a bit. I'm talking about
Uh-huh.
energy and the personality. Those do come into play. And I know that he mentioned, for instance, an episode where he was able to deal with a woman who was pretty kind of down and out, having difficult circumstances. And the part of the treatment of her was not only her treatment of her urinary problems, but was also treatment of how it uplifted her up kind of
Mhm.
emotionally and spiritually. That was part of the healing
Mhm.
process. And so I think that's also comes into play in that how he gives back through
Mhm.
volunteerism in the medical
Mhm.
field, so how he has a creative part about his
Mhm.
filmmaking and so on, and then his writing as well. And so I think that's a good thing. So
It was.
transformations take place in all kinds of ways, don't they, Deb? What I mean. There's a medical part, the physical health part. There's the emotional, the spiritual, and the
Mhm.
relational part as well.
Right.
So, anything else you think that we've learned from Dr. George that may be helpful to our audience as we try to share coping with hope?
It's kind of what you mentioned. We in many cases have a long-term relationship with our medical team, and we need to like them and trust them. And the doctors that I have, that I've had some of these doctors for 8 years, and hopefully I'll have them for many more. They are the ones that I can laugh with.
Yes,
We're talking about something incredibly serious, but we still laugh. And I think that is so important during this. And Dr. Ellis talked about that. It is, you can joke, and the two of you shared some little anecdotes during the thing.
right. You're
You
right.
know, it's funny. It's a little kind of dark humor,
Yeah,
but it happens. I mean, and why not get a giggle or two out of it?
sure, absolutely. Well, I also love the kind of the aspect here of okay, your life's not over with because you've had a transition.
Right.
Your life's
Mm-hmm.
not over with. You can pursue things, pursue your dreams, go for it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I certainly know you, Deb, as one of the people who's gone, really goes for it. You're not going to, you've really dealt with some very serious cancer circumstances, and you are just going forward. You're vibrant. You're alive. You got you know, your business podcast. You got this podcast that we do together, certainly as well as your Try Not to Die Live website and Facebook page. And you're hearing stories of people, and you're an encouragement to others. And I think and that has to do with pursuing your dreams. And I
Right.
certainly not giving up with this with whatever circumstances have to you. And maybe just maybe this could be kind of a you can utilize or leverage when a bad thing happens to you to do something completely new and
Mm-hmm.
creative,
Right.
out of the norm. Uh,
Urologists would make horror movies, right?
and then write a cookbook too. You know, uh,
I'm not sure about that. I mean, that is, a cookbook from a urologist.
Yeah. Well, even at the title is a surgeon's approach to
Uh-huh.
cooking. So there you
Mhm.
go. But that gets your attention, and I think
Mhm.
the idea here is to uh, take the opportunity here to live life to the fullest, to the very
Mhm.
till you can't go anymore,
Right.
till you can't
Right.
go anymore, and
No matter what your circumstances are, live
yeah,
life to the fullest.
live life to the fullest. I think that's a great message for us to take with us, and we certainly thank Dr. George Ellis for being our guest today, and we'll put everything about him in our show notes at
Perfect. I love it.
cancerandcomedy.com.
I love it. Well, lifter-uppers, this brings us to the close of this episode of the Cancer and Comedy Podcast with Dr. Brad Miller. Cancer and Comedy is all about telling uplifting stories of people like you who are kicking cancer's butt with healing through hope and humor. Did you know that you can join those of us who are turning the grim into grins by telling us your uplifting story? Just go to cancerandcomedy.com/voice message. That's all for now. Please join us next time on Cancer and Comedy. And if you like what you hear, please pass this podcast on to someone in your life who needs to turn their grim into a grin. For Dr. Brad Miller, I'm Deb Creer, reminding you that a cheerful heart is good medicine.